Started.
We have to sign that, don't we?
Yeah.
Hey, how'd your name get back on here?
I don't know. I was hoping it wouldn't. Okay, so let's call the City of Oregon City Planning Commission meeting work session to order Monday, February 12th, 2018. Should we take the roll?
Yes,
Do we for a
please.
work session? Okay.
Work session, roll, does that? We don't need to?
We normally don't. It's at the will of the
Okay, then we
commission.
won't.
Great.
Okay. Kelly Reed has a staff report for us to take a look at? Or I think, was it Kelly?
I do,
It's your
yeah.
staff report. Okay, great.
Thank you. All right, so I have just a few slides to go through the proposed code amendments. This is going to be planning file number L1704, and it is scheduled for a hearing next meeting, so in 2 weeks from now. So we have a copy of the draft code amendments on the agenda, and then I'm just going to do a quick summary of all of the kind of code cleanup items, along with then a lot averaging discussion to continue where we left off last time.
Yep.
So
Sorry, I was inhaling my broccoli.
It's okay.
I don't want to hear
We're
about
underway.
that.
Yeah, well, it's all gone. I just had to make sure it's not my tea.
So we provided notice citywide for this at the very end of December. That postcard went out late December, early January. We held a review by development stakeholders group, a work session with you all on January 22nd. And since then, we've seen also the Citizen Involvement Committee on February 5th. So now we're back with the work session, then we've got our hearing on the 26th. So to dive into the code amendments, I'm going to run through quickly, and if you have any comments or questions on these kind of code cleanup items, stop me and ask. Otherwise, I'll just move through, and then we'll get to lot averaging. So first, we are changing, or we're proposing to change some of our definitions and add a couple. We're revising family daycare definition to be consistent with Oregon Revised Statute. These are, uses that are permitted in residential zones,
That's key.
using your home
Yeah.
as a daycare.
Yep.
Adding definition of a building, and then a definition for net leasable area. Net leasable area is how we typically ask people to calculate their parking requirements, but we have not had a definition. And so this just kind of provides some more guidance to applicants.
You guys also have the definition of a structure?
Yes.
Along with building? Okay.
So we're tying the definition of building to the definition of structure.
So why don't,
Okay.
and you have that on here? I'm not on yet, but
Yes. I don't have the full code amendments up, but just a summary. But the full amendments are attached in your agenda packet. So the next change is to clarify that in our mixed use zones, single family and two family units are permitted when they're in conjunction with and located in the same building as another permitted use in the zone. So for example, if you have a retail store and you want to live above it, or have, a house attached to it on the back end of the retail store, we just want to clarify, we had been intending, that would be permitted, but it just wasn't clear in our code that it was. So this just makes it crystal clear that yes, that is permitted, along with, of course, outright multifamily development.
and what zones would those be permitted in?
We're talking about mixed use corridor 1 and 2, mixed use downtown, commercial and neighborhood commercial zones that this would apply. And so we don't allow single family, two family dwellings on their own in these zones, but if they're in conjunction with a retail or office or
What if
something
they're
like that.
pre-existing?
Or, yes, but yeah, this is for, so if we have pre-existing uses with like a retail store with an attached single family home or unit, then it would make those would be considered permitted and not non-conforming.
Okay, before you move on, I want to make since I discussed this at the last meeting, I want you to make absolutely sure that that it's clarified that the single family is built to a residential standard and the commercial is built to a commercial standard. They can't be, if you want to work in the building that you have a little loft in, that's different than living there and having incidental work. It's not the same thing. And people
Right.
confuse live work with work live.
Yeah, so we have a separate definition for home occupations. And so this is really if they're, you have commercial building code and all of that that would apply to the commercial use, and then residential separately. And we can make sure that there aren't any inconsistencies. We can go back and look and make sure we've covered our bases there.
Because otherwise it leads to very, very expensive and unhappy people.
Yeah. So our natural resource overlay district, we have a long list of exemptions, basically things that you are allowed to do in the natural resource overlay district
And what
without
page are you on?
requiring any review or getting any sort of permit.
What page are you on?
I am pages of this code amendment, let me check. This would be page, oh dear, 4.
Mine's like severely marked up, which is,
At the top of page 4, we have 1749-080, uses
Okay.
allowed outright,
okay,
exempted. So right now, letter C is utility service using a single utility pole. And then, or, and a whole nother different thing. And so we are separating that out because why put 2 different items in the same letter? And risk that people don't keep on reading.
exactly.
And so we're separating out the rest of letter C and adding, if you look to page 5, letter M is being added to this list to cover what was just taken out of letter C. And that is 100 square feet of ground surface disturbed when it is restored to pre-construction conditions. And we are adding a clarification that if pre-construction conditions are, a bunch of blackberries, that we don't necessarily want you to put that back the way it is, but we want you to replant it with native plants. And so this allows things like utility services. If somebody needs to, dig to put in a sewer line or a storm line, and they're in the natural resource overlay, and it's a small, less than 100 square foot area, and they're gonna replant it all and put it back, and it'll look like it did before or better, that is something that doesn't actually have to go through a whole review process, that can
Why would
happen.
we allow somebody to dig stuff or put stuff in a riparian area? To me, that seems a little.
So, yeah, so this is only
Sewers often go there.
outside the top
I
of
don't
bank.
want that either.
Yeah, it's not the best, but it's the
Top of
lowest.
page 8,
It's where engineers like to put them because it's usually the lowest place.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what if it's
Most
within
elevation.
so many feet of a stream bed?
So it has to be outside the top of bank,
Okay.
so it's only in the vegetated corridor.
Top of
And
page 8,
we're not, this was already in the code, it was just kind of buried in that letter C, and so we're just breaking it out and clarifying it
so
further.
what is 100 square feet?
What
What does
is
that look like on the ground?
Well, I think for this, it would probably look like maybe 50 feet of 2-foot wide excavation, potentially, for, to drop something in the ground.
Okay. It helps if I can visualize how much that is.
That grouping of chairs there is probably about 100 square feet.
That's pretty big. You're a grouping of chairs,
You're sitting in a grouping of chairs.
When she said that's pretty big.
but you haven't
she
been
was-
disturbed yet, so don't worry.
Probably a little larger.
When she said it's pretty big, it was the chairs, not you.
That's pretty close.
Okay. The next one, the next change is to clarify some of our decision-making and administrative processes. Updates the summary chart to be consistent with how we do business. Updates some language, and then we're clarifying how we calculate the number of days in the land use review process. It is calendar days, not business days. And then previously, we had the reconsideration process removed. We have pulled that out of these proposed code amendments just because there's some concern brought up. And these code amendments are really meant to be cleanup and not anything controversial aside from potentially the lot averaging. That's different. It came about in a different way. So that's been removed from the code changes at this point.
Okay, and we'll take that up at a later date?
We're planning on doing code amendments related to equitable housing within the next 6 to 9 months, probably. And so a lot of the items that are less cleanup and more substantive can be held to that time.
And then it's a request for reconsideration in this batch or the next, will it be in the next batch?
It's being taken out of this batch.
Out of this
That's okay.
Yeah.
I wanted to get a clarification on this business working days versus calendar days. Normally in the general public, isn't it working days versus calendar days?
Well, they use the term business days, not.
Business days.
Yeah.
Yeah. Isn't that, and we're going to calendar days?
We're not changing it. We're just clarifying that we use calendar days. That's how we operate now. And so we're just adding a sentence that clarifies that so that the public knows.
Yeah, well, that was my point. Should we be uniform in our application of this? Because I think during the course of doing business, it's normally business days as opposed to calendar days. Because if you have the weekend and you're making that count, the public doesn't have any access to City Hall, or is it just on basis of a postmark? If they send a letter on of course, they don't get a postmark on Saturday and Sunday, but aren't we sort of deviating from what the general
That's a great question. So right now, we are not business days. So for our 14 days for public notice and things like that, we do include weekends. And what we're doing with the code amendment is pointing to a section that's already in the municipal code that clarifies days, so we're not creating that either. So we normally do calendar days and not work days. There's no case really in planning where we do look at work days. It's always calendar days, and so we just want to be explicitly clear about that.
Well, down the road, I want to give the general public the greatest opportunity to make appeal to the city for whatever they're appealing for. And I don't want them on the basis of a technicality be shut off because they don't have they can't use, or they're shut off because Saturday and Sunday counts against them.
Yeah, we have received comments, like people email and things, and we have received
dated.
stuff on the weekends before. So it's, to my knowledge, it's actually never really been a problem.
Okay, all right.
It just was confusing.
Get a little more confusing when, I agree with Bob on the calendar days is a way that most residents would calculate it, but then a holiday would typically take that day out, so you wouldn't have 5
I think-
days in the week, you'd
I
only
don't-
have 4.
I don't think the holidays,
Well,
they're
the city's
counted.
not open.
They're counted as a day, but you can still have access online. I mean, what's been the rule of thumb in the planning field is calendar days.
Yeah.
It's not, unless it
Well-
specifically says business days, it's always been
I
calendar
think you're
days.
opening yourself up to peril if you're adding in all these weekend days and holidays and all that kind of stuff, because it's really easy to miscount the 120-day calculation. And so there's a lot of risk there, and then also the appeal dates get confusing.
Yeah.
Yeah, one reason I think that it works so well now is because we issue decisions Monday through Friday, and the 14 calendar
Right.
days get you back to a Monday through Friday thing as well, so it never really provides a problem. And then also in the code, our existing municipal code, just an earlier chapter, it clarifies if the last day is a holiday and that kind of thing, so.
Say that again.
It has some specifications about the last day being a holiday. You may recall we
Then
kind
you
of,
count the next day.
something like
Yeah.
that. Let me look while you guys
I
are
think it
talking.
only applies about days if you're the federal government and you get shut down. Then you've got some weird days going on because the government's not operating and you can't do anything.
But I think the And I realize this is going to vary all over the map, but residents don't necessarily think like planning department for timing and stuff like that. They're, and then as soon as you get that settled, why, it'll break out someplace else. There's a different interpretation of it. So the resident is kind of put in a spot to know precisely. Now, if you're going to appeal something, you could be expected that you should look it up and make sure. But there is no general rule anymore, I don't think. There's a general rule for planning, there's a general rule
It's
for...
calendar days for the city.
And one thing we try and do is always be clear on what those dates are. So in like our notices, we'll say give comment by this date, rather than, but our
On or
code,
before.
in the code it explicitly says, except when otherwise provided, the time within which an act is required to be done shall be computed by excluding the first and including the last day, unless the last day is a Sunday or a holiday, in which case it is also to be excluded. So that was codified in 1991.
Yeah, I think it's been in effect for a long time, and, okay.
Okay, we're now in chapter 1752. When we updated our TSP in 2013 and 2014, we also updated a lot of our code for parking and for transportation. And we added, as you might remember, a mechanism for people to request parking reductions from the Planning Commission at a type 3 level. But what we inadvertently removed was the automatic 10% reduction in minimum required parking when you are on a transit line or near a transit stop. And so that had been in the code before 2014, and that inadvertently was removed. And so some folks have missed out on this reduction that they had expected, I think, because it's been in our code forever.
Why is it automatic?
I'm sorry?
Why is it automatic?
Because there's a alternate mode that's nearby and
Can we have a
convenient.
definition for adjacent?
Yes, so it's within 1,000 feet of a stop, or what's the exact language here?
I could see that getting debated.
Adjacent to an existing or planned fixed public transit route, or within 1,000 feet of an existing or planned transit stop. So if you're adjacent to the route or near a stop.
There's like a weird thing.
I'm a fan of this line of code. I'm glad to see it back in there. I think in the future, I would love to have even more aggressive things that reduce parking, including if they had access to car share or something like that.
Yeah, I was just on Mississippi and Williams the other day, trying to visit a friend that lives 2 blocks off. Guess where all the people are parking? In their neighborhood, because the apartments don't have any parking. It was not good. It was not good.
Okay, next one is just a clarification of when non-conforming upgrades are required. If you have a non-conforming site and you're expanding it, if you're spending a certain threshold of money on your project, it triggers non-conforming upgrades. But we didn't have a definition really of expansion or a clarification of what that entails. And so this just clarifies that if you're adding square footage to a non-conforming site or adding parking spaces off-street, then that's when we consider it an expansion. Yes?
It just seems a little generous. My feeling is that a non-conforming use, if they're doing something other than it down the interior of the building, they should be required to upgrade. That way they don't continue being a non-conforming use in perpetuity and end up being, unfortunately, most of them are blights on the community.
Yeah, this is for just non-conforming sites. So for example, like a McDonald's or something that maybe doesn't meet our code for setbacks or parking, if they invest in facade upgrades, but they're not actually expanding their footprint, it would not be considered an expansion.
And we want to make it easy for people to move incrementally closer to So if you're adding a window, for example, we wouldn't want to then require additional upgrades of the applicant. We want to make them to do whatever it is so they can get slowly closer and closer. But when they change that footprint and they intensify the use or anything at all, then we want to take a look at it.
What about if a property which is correctly zoned but doesn't have proper parking, such as there's no landscaping, there's no drainage, there's no grading, it's just dirt? How would we be able to, since that's non-conforming, how would we be able to get them to bring that parking area into conformance?
If they want to add a parking space,
Well, there are no parking spaces, it's dirt.
well then, if they want to
They want to use it?
develop the lot, that's tricky.
So what if they want to use that area for parking and it's just
Yeah,
dirt?
yeah. That gets kind of complicated because if they show that they have a legally non-conforming parking lot, like they've been parking, X number of cars there for the last 30 years and it was legally permitted at the time, then they can continue to do that.
Well,
If they want
Let me throw another
to.
monkey wrench in that
Yeah.
let's just say that it was residential and they converted it to commercial.
We verify it through a site plan design review when they do the change in use. And if they want to park in this square footage, which was next to the parking dirt area, then we see
for the
that as an
house.
expansion.
Okay.
So we'll do a non-conform, site plan design review when you flip from residential to commercial. And there's not actually a lot of stuff that we look at. We do look at to make sure that they have the minimum number of parking. That being said, it's normally a type 2 minor site plan design review, and they, show where their driveway was where their 2 stalls are, because there's usually a small square footage that doesn't require much parking.
Okay.
Type 1 site plan. So we adopted the type 1 site plan process, I think, 2 years ago here. And we have realized that we could benefit from a couple clarifications. One would be that tree removal is something that should be reviewed as type 1 site plan. We kind of folded it into landscaping, and that was confusing for some folks. So we want to have that on the list as well as changes to landscaping. And then for demolitions, I think inadvertently, the way we wrote it, we talked about additions or demolitions greater than or less than 200 square feet. And we implied that if it's greater than 200 square feet, it's a type 2. But because of the way we wrote it, we also implied that demolitions greater than 200 square feet are a type 2 review process, which we've never really had demolitions as a land use review process. We've just allowed a demolition in most cases, unless it's a historic building or something. And so we want to be able to allow demolitions of any size to go through this type 1 site plan review, which would actually be more review than demolitions had ever received previously.
Well, I think it's a step in the right direction. I don't think demolitions should just kind of happen, mainly because I don't know if you've read about all the stuff in Portland where people started demolishing houses that had asbestos, and then there were some commercial buildings with similar situations, and stuff was flying all over, and people were not really happy about the fibers and God knows whatever else was flying out there to just kind of have.
Fibers, asbestos and stuff like that.
I mean, you can't see it
Yeah.
until it gets into here.
What kind of precautions do we take in the demolition of a building if it might, and I use the word might, have asbestos in it or dangerous fibers? Do we take precautions on that?
As far as I know, those are, that's governed by DEQ. And I'm thinking of, Willamette Falls, for example, where before a demolition permit is issued, a DEQ process and approval has to be obtained that basically has a kind of a demolition plan that is gives details about how all of those hazardous materials will be handled and then disposed of. And so I think it's a county and state
Thing.
mechanism.
We also require building permits for demolitions, even if it's just your shed. I mean,
Good.
small buildings too, so we do have a permitting process that we look at.
So I'm on page 12 where you have minor site plan and design review. And I was looking for the item about the trees again, because I know I saw it and I probably marked it, but I'm not seeing my markup here.
It's on the end of the list, in
Very
13.
end.
Page 13.
Okay.
Okay. So small change to landscaping. Right now, we require a landscape architect to sign any landscaping plan that's submitted to us. We see a lot of small projects where that is kind of seen as a little bit
Onerous?
And so we have that second bullet to allow any landscape projects that deal with less than 500 square feet of landscaping to be signed off on and kind of stamped by an arborist, nurseryman, or landscape designer in addition to the landscape architect, or instead of the landscape architect.
Do people know what a certified landscape designer, arborist, or nurseryman is? What kind of certification are they required to have?
Yeah, all of those are required to have certification, so that we can kind of look that up in the state registry.
So like a license?
Yeah,
I mean, I know what landscape architects are required to have, so
Right,
that's,
right.
I was wondering if it was similar.
yeah, so all these, I think that they're easier to get, licenses are easier to get than a landscape architect license, so these folks are more available and probably less costly to folks to use. And then we're just kind of clarifying and bringing some consistency to our landscaping percentages with that last bullet there. Okay, site plan design review standards, just a few cleanup items here. Allowing chain link around stormwater facilities where it's otherwise prohibited. Removing a requirement for mechanical changes. It's another conflicting requirement. Clarifying, actually connecting the site plan design review chapter to that non-conforming upgrades chapter so that applicants that are reading our code know that they may need to go look at that non-conforming chapter. Removing other redundant sections. Outdoor lighting requirements, we have standards for bulb type and fixture type that are kind of outdated. It doesn't account for the new technology like LEDs. And so removing those completely to just, we really care about how bright it is, not what type of light bulb it is.
So you guys have a standard for luminaires or any kind of attenuation, lighting attenuation requirements or any of that?
I think we have.
I'll give you an example. I'm driving up Malala Avenue and I'm looking at this vape shop that has these wall pack units that are shining out into the roadway that can be seen from space. And
Yeah.
I think that there needs to be, I understand that we need to upgrade the standards, but I think there also needs to be some kind of attenuation standard for lighting in general for design review and that kind of thing, so that there isn't
Yeah.
that
There's a
issue.
hair salon on Monroe Avenue that says the same problem. I mean, when
There's
it's
the reader board signs too
super-
that flash and
super
all that.
bright.
Yeah. Yeah, so we do have light trespass and kind of foot candle requirements. So we look at photometric plans to make sure that the light doesn't go beyond a certain level outside of the property lines of whatever property we're dealing with. So it sounds like those examples you brought up probably don't comply with our code. And so that would be a code enforcement issue at this point.
Yeah.
But when we review land use applications, we do look at the photometrics and make sure that there isn't any light shining on adjacent properties or into the right of way.
Yeah.
Or that if it is, it's only 0.05 foot candles that's allowed. And so that wouldn't change, it would just be the bulb type and fixture type.
I'm a big fan of dark skies. Yeah, okay.
Well, let me tell you what the latest thing is on. I don't know if you've been up Malala Avenue at night, but somebody now has a lighted real estate sign. It's got lights around it. I could see that there's like a cartridge pack
Like
that
a
light.
little battery operated.
Yes, and I was just
Chase
like,
lighting around that
yep.
thing.
I was just like,
Oh, my Lord.
I thought, okay, and then I'm gonna call it out, the taco time, it's inside the window, but it does this.
Oh, yeah.
You're driving down Malala Avenue and it's doing,
I think that's,
it is
illegal, I think.
extremely distracting.
It's inside the window?
Yes,
Is that,
it's a strobe.
it's like it does, it kind of like has a strobe on it, and I don't go there anymore, but I was looking at it last night and I thought, we need to do something about that, because that is distracting to drivers.
So anyway, standards versus enforcement, but, so that's good, that you
Okay.
guys are.
So the
Yeah.
the last one on this list is communication facilities. There's a 2012 court ruling that kind of changed the federal standards and rights for wireless communication facilities, and so we're just amending our code to be consistent with that, so that we're not in any violation.
And where is that at?
Requirements of this.
Chapter 1780 on page 22.
22, okay. 22, okay.
So it's,
C?
For co-location, yeah, okay.
The mounting of a proposed such and such?
essentially what it said was that if you have an existing facility, you can use that existing facility and you could add more things on it with less review.
Good.
It's only when you start to expand and it gets into this definition of expansion, which is different than we had previously interpreted.
Okay.
Okay, and so now we're gonna dive back into lot averaging. Just to review, the current code is that lot sizes within a subdivision, 4 or more lots, may be up to 20% less than the zoning designation if the subdivision as a whole averages zoning minimum. The draft proposal is to change that 20% to 10%, and then cap the total number of lots that can be smaller than the zone minimum to less than 25% of the total lots in the subdivision. So we've got just a couple of examples just to demonstrate how this works for the kind of benefit of the public. And you guys don't see a whole lot of subdivisions because they're mostly type 2 processes. So, so we'll go through a couple examples. And I just want to point out the other subdivision kind of lot-related standards that are not proposed to change, but that do impact kind of the layout and the size of lots and the number of lots. And those are a minimum lot width in our code, minimum lot depths, maximum lot coverages, which in the R6, R8, R10 zone is 40%. I'm sorry?
40% of what?
Maximum lot coverage of buildings.
Okay.
Of all buildings over 200 square feet. Minimum setbacks, of course, in every zone. Minimum required density, so each subdivision has to show that it meets at least 80% of the minimum density with the number of lots they're proposing. And then maximum block length, that we value street connectivity, and so we have a maximum block length that there is a street connection every 530 feet at most. And so our first example.
Is this the same one we saw before?
No, it's
good.
different.
Okay.
Yeah, so we actually went back to subdivisions that have been approved with this code, and just to kind of look and see how they measure out and like what percentage of their lots are less than, and you know, how much less are they.
Awesome.
So this one is 2013 subdivision in the R8 zone, so the minimum lot size here is 8,000 square feet. The net developable area, so after you remove all of the area that's used for streets and like storm facilities, what's left is the area for building homes. And so that's the net developable area. And so we take that, we divide it by 8,000, which is the average lot size, required average lot size, and we get 27. So 27 is the maximum number of lots that this subdivision can have.
Currently.
This is
Or
under
the
current
future.
code, yeah,
Okay.
under the existing code, which was in place in 2013 when these guys came. Yes.
Isn't this, so this is next to Rose Road and White Lane in that area that had the,
It's off of Central Point, yeah,
that
White
had the
Lane.
drainage problems, as I recall. I'm going way back into my brain from before this actually was in our boundary. There were some water problems in this area, as I am remembering.
There weren't any drainage problems with development that didn't get sorted out.
I mean, there were some low spots and people were doing some strange things like trying to fill it in.
So the maximum that they would be permitted is 27 lots, and they proposed 27 lots. The average lot size that they proposed is factored out to be 8,208 square feet. And so that's what that layout looks like. Over on the left, you can see the table for each lot, 1 through 27, and what size it was proposed as. And then the preliminary plat here, shown in the middle. And over on the right, I'm gonna kind of read the stats off. So of the 27 lots, 8 of them are less than 8,000 square feet. And so that's 30% of the subdivision had lots less than 8,000 square feet. The smallest lot proposed is 7,072 square feet, and it's this lot 7 right here in the middle, and this lot 6. Both of those are 7,072, and that is 11.6% smaller than 8,000. And so those are the only 2 lots that were more than 10% less. All the rest were within 10% of 8,000. Did you have a question?
This is probably simple, but the table on the left, for instance, lot 6 says 7059, and then it says 7072 on the plat.
Lot 6, yeah. So this is the final plat, and then this was the preliminary. So it varies slightly, like the numbers are slightly different because they went through, they did all of the engineering work and then got their final plat put together. But the stats over here are the same for both. I double checked to make sure that none of that actually changed with the final
And
plat.
I thought, well, maybe I was looking at it.
Curious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe if you can fit it in somewhere, maybe put preliminary plat information, because.
Yeah, that's why I have
Yeah.
this
Oh, there
little
it is.
little asterisk down here.
Yeah, you need an asterisk someplace else so you
Yeah.
know because where is the asterisk besides down at the bottom? Usually there's an asterisk someplace at the top where you're saying asterisk and then you look down at the bottom. So maybe after subdivision and the comma, the colon,
Right.
the parentheses, put the
Yeah.
little thing there so that you know
Yeah.
where to look.
So this, as is, this subdivision would not be able to meet the new proposed code language of 25% because it has 30% of the lots that are fewer. And then it also has 2 lots that are more than 10% less than 8,000. And so it barely doesn't meet both of those items.
Kelly, would you say this is like a typical example? That's why we kind of picked this one.
I pulled some very typical examples just to kind of show you how we go through the steps and what we're looking at when we
And I
review.
think the point we're trying to make was that this is an average case scenario. Worst case scenario, you have lots that are much smaller.
Right.
And the proportionality between the 2 lot sizes, you have something that's 14,000 square feet on one side and something that's 4,000 square feet
Well, we had
on the other.
29,000 on one
In
of
an
them, and it
RH,
was
right,
something else,
right.
yeah.
But anyway, what I'm trying to say is that, RH should be fairly within the
Consistent.
ballpark of what that is.
That's exactly the conversation we want to have in this work session, is our proposed code amendments missing the mark because our average wouldn't meet it anymore? And did we answer the problem that you thought that we needed to solve? And if that problem was that the biggest lot can't be more than X number of times the smallest lot, then we can rewrite that code, lot average code, to reflect that. So like, what is the problem we're trying to solve? Did we hit it? Did we miss it? It sounds like there's still a little bit.
I don't. My biggest problem with the thing as it previously was the fact that we had all of these lots adjacent to the power lines, which in my mind, again, this is just from past experience here, you really don't want to be developing anywhere near those things. And I don't think that was BPA's intent when they created the easement, that people would be putting houses near enough to them, or their backyards would be underneath, where the lines are coming across. And it just, sometimes you just have to leave stuff, you just leave it, you don't build anything there. And so we had these 30,000 square foot lots with these, as Paul said, these 4,000 square foot lots, and I just,
Yeah, and what I'm getting at is very specifically on the one that we reviewed were the ones that were off the eyebrow, that were really super narrow, and it didn't look like, you design lots like that, and then you end up having to field variances because the lots are too narrow and they're not able to meet setbacks for a typical, even just a narrow boxcar style house that would fit on that,
like a ranch burger.
Right. So I'm just.
So what I liked about the first example is we were able to see a different shadow plat of how they would develop under the current guidelines, so we don't know how this would look.
We don't, but
You don't have because the other one you asked them to take
Yeah.
and show it, but this one we haven't done that.
the consultant actually did the
Right.
work to show us how they would design it under that code. So we didn't do that for these, but we're just pulling some typical subdivisions that we see to show you how it measures against what's proposed. And so this one wouldn't meet the new code,
Right.
but just by a little bit.
Yeah.
You'd certainly lose one lot for sure.
Yeah. Well, I think, I'm concerned with a little bit of the language you're using. It just it either's going to meet it or it's not. We don't want to
Oh, yeah.
say to anybody, it's just barely there, so maybe you have an avenue for getting an exception. So they either meet
No, that
under
wasn't
the
our
new
intent.
standard. I know, but again, I'm trying to think like somebody who's listening to it
Yeah.
out there and going, okay, what did I just hear? So I'm hoping that we'll look at it from the standpoint of either meets it or it doesn't.
But again, also, to the other side, I think the list of lot sizes that you've got here is
that's-
reasonable.
Yeah, well, that's the
Right.
plat.
Yeah.
That's the preliminary plat.
That's what I
not
mean.
what
But I
finally
mean,
happened.
But the standards yield this. This almost meets the standards that you're proposing. And what I'm saying is that these standards that produce these lot sizes typically would probably be acceptable.
Oh, I like, 20, some of these others that are 8,000 and 23, I like that better than 8,000.
Right.
They're over the finish line there.
So are we decided on having both of these new requirements, the average as well as the lots less piece?
We're still talking about it.
Yeah, it's whatever the commission, but we did hear a lot of feedback that we're being double restrictive. We're restricting the size because you can't go as small, and then we're also restricting the percentage.
Where
And
did you hear that feedback, since we only discussed it here? Was it at CIC?
we heard it a lot of places. We went to the development stakeholders group. We did talk about it at CIC, but we didn't get a ton of feedback on it. It sounded like it was fine.
I'm going to switch seats here because I've got Damon's comments, so I'm going to pretend I'm putting on my Damon hat.
Yeah, it's whatever the commission wants to do. We did hear that 25% is mighty, to only have a quarter of the lots be below is small, particularly if you're given that 10%. And we did hear that of the 10% or the 25%. I think we actually heard testimony at our last work session about it too.
Well, Damon's comment is that he thinks that this is workable, and he said that he feels that we should go ahead and try to do this. And we've got probably, 6 months to a year maybe to try it out and see how it's working. But he said this is reflective of what we've heard from the community.
The other part is we have the equitable housing thing going on, and so we could, deal with it during equitable housing or do another
No,
look. I mean, either
don't
one of
think we-
those
I don't think
options.
we want to wait.
I think the complicated thing is we don't really know what the result of this code language is, right?
It was on the screen a bit ago, Laura. Is it both or one or the other?
It's both.
Both.
Yeah.
The draft now has both, but you
I
can
like
tell us to change it, and when we come back before you again, we'll have it be different.
Do you, if you had to
support both.
choose one that would be stronger on its own, which one would it be?
I believe what we heard
Could you flip
is
back,
that the
Laura?
reduction from going 20% smaller to 10% smaller
On average.
is worse for development than the 25% cap. But then also the 25% cap was small, if that could be bigger. But it's when you have to squish a lot into a constrained space and you're like this close, that's where that 10% comes in. Not that you want to repeat it all the time. So the development stakeholders group certainly was talking about could a couple of lots be 10, 20%, or, can you split that difference? And we can certainly write whatever code that we need to write, but it was,
Does it have to be an even 10 or 20? Is there something in between, 12%, 15%? Does it have to be 10 or 20? An even number?
It's easier
Nope.
to calculate.
Would be
Well,
so.
sure, it's
whatever-
easy to calculate.
whatever the will of the
I'm trying to think of a
commission is.
negotiating
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
I think one of the complicating factors is when you get an annexation together with a zone change, together with a preliminary plat, and
I
you
don't like
jump
those.
2 zones with a zone change, and then add in lot averaging. Gets a little complicated even for the most skilled planners as to how to address that, how to justify it, how to make sense out of it. And what you're trying to do is make sense out of this lot averaging so everybody can understand it. But when you add all those factors together, I don't think it's doing the public a service. I really don't. You're going to have to take these things a step at a time, because that's what planning's all about, is a step at a time. You don't throw spaghetti at a wall and see what sticks and call it planning. And that's what we've been asked to do a couple of annexations ago, and it's ended up getting kind of ugly. So I think if we take these things a step at a time, and we lay these things out for the public, because this is what we're being asked to address and approve, it's okay. So part of it's in the procedure, not just the standards. And I don't like this bum's rush of annexation, zone change, subdivision, lot averaging, and throw it all together and ask us to make sense out of it all and the public to understand.
Yeah, I think the difficult part about that is if someone submits an application, we have an obligation to process it, and we can't.
Then we've got to have some policies to say the planning commission will not consider all these factors in our application process. If we can change standards, we can change the process by which we hear these standards. If they want an annexation, let them have an annexation. Come before us with an annexation, then follow it up with a zone change, so that it's clear and defined for the public.
We actually have the opposite of that in our code. It talks about combining things. But if they want to submit multiple applications, there's nothing in our code that excludes that.
Bob's
And
just suggesting that probably be, Bob is suggesting it be changed. Am I correct, sir?
Yes, I am. I don't like this, the tail wagging the dog. We've got standards for how you're going to build. Let's have some standards of how you're going to apply.
I'm a little confused at what the problem is. It's just because someone's submitting too many applications at one time, or because their standards aren't good?
Well, I think too many applications at one time. There's nothing but muddy the waters, in my judgment.
Well understood. It's just difficult since we can't, property owners can submit applications when they want to, and we have to process it.
Well, what
There's a
Bob's
little
saying
bit.
is there a way to decouple that so that the zone change subdivision are one application and the annexation is a different application without it being bundled. That's what I think
Yeah,
that's what,
yeah.
I think that's what he's trying
Yeah.
to say.
Yeah, you could put it on the agenda separately, but don't bundle it. It's almost as if when you do that, you don't give us an opportunity to make choices.
Oh, are you talking about them being separate staff reports but on the same agenda?
Yeah, I wouldn't
Okay.
have any problem with that if they want to put it on the agenda that way, but just have us consider it separately so that one motion doesn't have to apply to everything.
Huh, okay. Give me a moment to
Get
think on
back to
that.
that.
Yeah.
Well, and then from a purist standpoint, you technically can't review a subdivision that isn't in your city yet. It's called an extra-jurisdictional review of an application.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
Say again, I didn't catch that.
Now, there are some
Say-
jurisdictions
say it
that,
again.
an extra-jurisdictional review of of the land use application. So in other words, technically, you can tell an applicant that they cannot submit an application until the property's inside the city where you guys have jurisdiction. If you don't have jurisdiction, it's not really your application to
Could you
accept.
please make sure the door is closed? Because the discussion out there is just a little bit distracting. Thank you.
Now,
No, don't tell
some-
everybody to come in
We
yet.
we believe we
Some-
do have jurisdiction.
Some folks do allow someone to submit a subdivision or another application at their risk and then allow the annexation and the subdivision to run concurrently or maybe slightly staggered. But then the applicant has to be informed that, you know, the annexation could be denied and then everything else goes to smithereens because the property has to be annexed before you can actually process it.
Let me take a moment, think about
Okay.
this, and then at the
We don't
next,
have to get back
this
to
may
it.
come in with
It's
this
almost-
You don't have to-
hearing.
you don't have to
There
get
may,
back to us right now.
Yeah.
there's a lot of different ways to cut this pie. It may be a
Yep.
policy decision of how they show up on the agenda or not. So let me
to you
take a look
guys.
and we'll get back to you in a couple weeks
So
about
since
it.
we're getting really close, I just want everybody to remember, not that you want to recap the meeting on the tape, but we heard substantial and substantive testimony from our community about this, and we need to fix it. I respect and understand what the development community is saying, but that is not what our charge was. Our charge was, City Commission said, we got a problem with this, we need to fix it to make it more palatable and acceptable for our community. And the community people are going to be here long after all the people who are developing are going to be here. So I think we owe it to our constituents to basically take a look at this from a real standpoint of the things that they brought up and the things that they were concerned about, and make sure that we've got it right this time, because I think we heard commission-wide that we did not have it right. Not, we didn't do it, but,
Yeah.
um,
And I think we should use the base on standards as a starting point.
Right.
Instead of the current standards.
yeah. So the other thing I wanted to bring up real quickly in the next 2 minutes is that I think I'm aware, and I'm going to ask for your correction, I'm presuming that we all own property within the city of Oregon City, or at least within the urban growth boundary. Am I correct with that?
Yep.
All of us on here do?
Yes.
So I think one of the things I want to caution us, just to be aware of it, is that if we own property that could potentially benefit from what we are doing, I think there needs to be some discussion from whoever it is. So let's just say I own property in the urban growth boundary. It's not yet in the city limits, and that it might be brought into the city limits. I feel personally that I would need to declare that I could be a beneficiary of this.
We'll go through all the legal disclosures, Carrie will do them when we
Right, I
start
know.
our hearing.
Well, we'll do them, and she'll tell us whether
Yeah.
we're right or not. But I just want that on the table, because I thought about that the other day, and I thought, that is true. That, I don't, but I'm just saying that if I did possibly.
It's legislative, so it's a little bit different.
It is, but
Because
there could be a perception out there that somebody could potentially down the road benefit from what we do here, and I don't want that discussion to be tainted because somebody perceives that there's a conflict of interest. So I just wanted to get that out to my fellows here.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Let's do the next thing.
Okay, let's take like a minute or two break, because not everybody's going to be able to get in here. So
You can have my seat.
let's just take a
I wanna
break
give
for a
them
minute.
Heads up, I have a hard stop at 10.
You have a who?
A hard stop at 10?
Okay. So we're in a work session, so we're not opening the hearing or anything.